Hi, everyone. So I was invited here because of my work in sustainability and clean tech, but the most important lesson I learned from my work wasn't about the impact or the scale. It was about a quiet failure mode that often occurs when we try to build something meaningful, when care turns into pressure. So this talk isn't really so much about giving back as it is why meaning can quietly fade when life looks successful, why motivation can silently transform into pressure, why doing more doesn't fix the emptiness, and why ambition often turns against the person holding it. So a good frame that's helped me think about this is that there's three different kinds of knowing or wisdom. The first is belief. Someone tells you something is true, you accept it. The second is intellectual understanding. You can rationalize it, it makes sense to you. The deepest level of knowing or wisdom is experiential. You know it in your bones because you've made contact with it, you've felt it. So a talk like this can give you at best some intellectual understanding, but the real truth about giving back and the real truth about burning out is something that you learn from practice, from contact. And this is important because I had an experience that gave me something like experiential knowing. And I assumed it would last, but it didn't. Often these moments of insight can fade, and the problem isn't that they fade. The problem is when we keep acting as if they hadn't. So, I've always been curious. I've always loved learning. I was very lucky that I had parents that fostered that and put me in good schools. When it came time for me to apply to university, I only applied to my dream school and got in. That's the level of confidence I was carrying at the time. I married my high school sweetheart when I was 20. That was where I was a little bit overconfident and underqualified. Shortly after our honeymoon, she experienced a traumatic event that reshaped our lives, and what followed was a really serious mental health crisis in our relationship. I took a step back from my degree that I'd worked my whole life to get into and took restaurant jobs to survive. Other areas of my life started to unravel, and after a couple very intense years, the marriage didn't last despite my best efforts. I moved back in with my parents, feeling like a complete shell of who I used to be. And it wasn't until I started meditating and not numbing myself anymore, knowing that, if I feel like I'm at rock bottom, there's only one way, and that's up. So I reapplied to my program at university. I was very lucky they welcomed me back. And I had a really profound shift that changed how I experienced life and myself. It was like the boundary between myself and others softened, and I felt this intense gratitude for being alive and having a second chance. And compassion wasn't something I'd ever really thought about, and it wasn't something I was trying to do, but suddenly I felt this sense that I wanted to give back. And that was an experience that I felt. It wasn't something I tried to get into. And I thought that would last, and I started to build my life around it. But what happened was subtle, is that my mind started rationalizing that experience, and I started living from explanation instead of contact. So my brother gave me a book around that time that helped me ground this experience and understand it from a certain lens. And it makes a simple but profound point that this implicit experiential understanding comes before explicit conceptual understanding. You don't fall in love by listing reasons. The feeling comes first, the reasons come after. And it also told me how our culture has really been shaped by a very narrow analytical way of seeing the world, what we often call the left brain. That's the mode of thinking that had rewarded me in my life, focusing on math and science. And what that experience gave me, it felt like my right brain had shifted on for the first time. I was experiencing context, connection, care. And my curiosity changed. I was returning to my program, finishing my degree, and I was much interested in systems, in why care is often overridden by ethics, why solutions exist, but systems stay stuck. And my mind, because the mind has so much momentum, rushed in to explain this sort of compassion that I felt. And it said, okay, if the problem is suffering, the solution must be scale. And scale means money. So how can I build something massive at scale that's going to give me the power to change things from the top down? And that's how strategy can quietly replace care and contact. So I'll tell you a story about the project I worked on after that inspiration that encapsulates it better than any slide could. I was living in Bali, preparing a pitch for the president of Indonesia for a technology I developed that can turn plastic into fuel. And everything had been really stalled, permits were delayed, decisions were deferred. And this week, a landfill in Bali had caught fire, and the air was full of this thick, toxic smoke. I'd ordered an air purifier on express shipping. People were coughing outside. It was dystopian, and the contrast between what I was trying to do and what I was so frustrated wasn't working was almost laughable. But that frustration I felt, I recognized, wasn't because the system was stuck. It was because I'd become so attached to this project. It wasn't anymore about the people affected by the problem, it was about me. It was about my sense of effectiveness, my identity, my meaning that had wrapped around it. And this is a very common pattern that I think happens in people who care, right? The care turns into responsibility, and that turns into pressure. And the pressure can turn to hardness and tightening. And I didn't notice that in myself, and it wasn't burnout yet, but the tightening continued for a while. Until a point that I had to take a pause from that project. I was pushing for years, and about a year and a half ago, my brother died, and I couldn't keep pushing anymore. I had to step back, and the grief obviously mattered, but because I couldn't keep pushing, I reflected and I recognized that the action that I was doing in my project, the way that I was doing the work, had changed, and I was no longer fed by this inspiration to help people. I was driven by pressure, identity. And I'll zoom out here because this is where the pattern becomes more universal. It's not just about me. You see this so often in nonprofits, in organized religion, in some corners of the effective altruism movement, that goodness starts to become an optimization treadmill. When the mind takes control of what the heart wants to do, it does something to you. Over-rationalizing, giving back, often leads to burnout because we're bound to be met with resistance. So if we're attached to the outcome with our identity, that obligation starts to wear you down. And I didn't have the language for this distinction at the time. We talk about intention a lot these days, but I don't think people need better intentions. Intention is kind of like the steering wheel of a car. It's what you aim at. Volition is the felt energy that's behind the action. It's like the engine, or more specifically, the fuel. If you're running on dirty fuel, you might not notice it for a while. You might go far, you might even accelerate, but the engine is heating up, you're producing harmful emissions. So intention is more linguistic, and volition is embodied. That explains why intention alone isn't usually enough. Another thinker that helped me understand this and how it applies to organizations is Dreyfus. And he talks about how humans develop mastery. At the beginner level, people rely on rules. And then competent people deliberate, they choose, they plan. But experts and masters, they don't rely on rules at all. Action just flows. And this is the same place where giving back is nourishing and feels natural. We're not trying to give back, we're just giving. And at the organizational level, companies that become disconnected from a clear purpose start to have to explain themselves much more. And our culture rewards this. We have so many KPIs, metrics, audits, and it leads to constant self-examination. And that leads to chronic self-consciousness. And that's exhausting. That's burnout. So I don't think we need better intentions. I think we need better diagnostics. Not rules, but signals. One is, ask yourself, after an action, do I feel subtly replenished or a little bit resentful? Resentment isn't a moral failure. It's information about the engine that moved the action. Another is, how much do I need to explain why I'm doing something? When you're in contact with a clear mission, with a clear felt volition, explanation is diminished. But on the organizational level, when you have a disconnection between purpose and what's moving it, you get more and more decks explaining what we're doing. The third is the self-monitoring test. Am I doing this, or am I watching myself do it? Constant self-watching and judging is the friction that causes burnout. So this might sound very personal, like I'm saying you should choose between inner work and professional work, but I'm talking about the relationship between them. Because giving back as a human being is about orientation. Giving back professionally is about scale, missions, companies, and your professional work is one of the ways that your giving back expresses itself, but not the source of it. Going back to that experience that I told you about, I think we've all had some moment of inspiration, some connection with something deeper that shaped our intentions. And those moments are like you get a fruit. Life has given you a fruit that you taste and it's sweet. And sometimes that seed from the fruit can grow into a small sprout. But if we don't tend to it, if we don't take care of it, our minds, life, something's going to come along and crush the sprout before it can grow into a tree that gives us that fruit again and again. But often we are just left with the memory of the fruit, and we try to live from the explanation, and our mind will try to force that memory into a felt reality. So giving back, I think, should be treated as a virtue like love or patience, where the way that you develop it is practicing it imperfectly, right? The destination is also the vehicle. And it's normal that we don't feel a clear volition all the time to give back. What's important is just noticing, right? Volition can't be manufactured, but the practicing is noticing what's actually moving you. And sometimes the clear signal isn't that you're wanting to give back outwardly. Sometimes the first step is giving back to yourself. And that's not a detour from giving back to the world. That's actually a prerequisite. So I don't think giving back is a trophy or a brand. The truth is we're giving back all the time, and we get to choose what we're giving back. Some giving back looks like action, some looks like restraint. Sometimes the most important way to give back is just not to participate in what deforms us. So giving back, I think, I'm not here to tell you to give back, but when done with a clear volition, it really is one of the ways of living a good life. It's nourishing, it's not self-sacrifice. But it's so easy for our minds to try to live from explanation when we have a mission that we become attached to. But the invitation is just to notice where your energy feels forced and where it feels nourishing and flowing. So choose the way of giving back that just allows you to stay honest, present, and human. Thank you.